Imagine a city so paralyzed by fear, so haunted by a phantom, that it holds the largest, most desperate party in its history just to survive the night. Imagine thousands of homes, from the richest mansions to the poorest shacks, blasting the same music, a frantic, blaring cacophony of sound. This wasn't a celebration, it was an exorcism. The city was New Orleans, the year was 1919, and the music was jazz. They were playing for their lives, ordered to do so by a killer who claimed he was a demon from hell, a killer who had already butchered men and women in their beds. This is the story of the Axeman of New Orleans, the real-life boogeyman who held a city hostage, and the one bizarre night he demanded they play. Hello and welcome to TSF History. We dig into the past to uncover the stories that time forgot, the mysteries that remain unsolved, and the figures who haunt our memories. If you love deep dives into the darkest, most fascinating corners of history, you are in the right place. So do us a favor, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. You don't want to miss a single story. Now let's go back to a time when the jazz was loud and the shadows of New Orleans held a terrifying secret. Our story begins not with a whisper, but with a scream, though it was one that nobody heard. The date is May 23, 1918. The world is at war, but in the vibrant, humid streets of New Orleans, the war seems a world away. Here, life is a mix of Creole culture, burgeoning jazz music, and the daily hustle. In a modest apartment at the back of their small grocery store lived Joseph Maggio and his wife Catherine. They are part of the city's large, hard-working, and often marginalized Italian-American community. That morning, Joseph's brother, Andrew, comes to the shop for his shift. He finds the front door locked, which is unusual. He walks around to the back, and a sense of dread begins to creep in. He finds a rear door panel, chiseled out. He forces his way inside and is met with a scene of unimaginable horror. The apartment is saturated in blood. Joseph Maggio is lying on the bed, his skull brutally crushed. But the horror inflicted on his wife Catherine was even more profound. Her throat had been slit so deeply she was nearly decapitated. The killer had then proceeded to mutilate her body. The couple had been attacked as they slept with their own axe, which was found discarded in the room, dripping with blood. On the wall, written in chalk, was a cryptic message. The police, in their haste, or perhaps their incompetence, washed it away before it could be properly documented. The city was horrified. This was not a simple robbery. The killer had left money and jewelry untouched. This was an act of pure, personal butchery. The police were baffled. They arrested two men, Andrew Maggio, the brother who found the bodies, and his associate, but the case was paper-thin and quickly fell apart. The Italian community buzzed with rumors of the mafia or the Hand Secret. But this felt different. This felt like the work of a madman. For a month, the city held its breath. Then on June 27th, the axeman struck again, this time across the river in Gretna. Louis Bessemer, another Italian grocer, and his partner, or mistress as the papers called her, Harriet Lowe, were attacked in their beds. When neighbors heard moans and found the couple, they were clinging to life. Bessemer's skull was fractured, and Lowe was covered in blood, a gash running from her ear to her mouth. In the kitchen, police found the murder weapon, a bloody axe belonging to Bessemer himself. The back door panel? Chiseled out. The pattern was set. Harriet Lowe, before she died 2 days later, gave a confusing statement. She claimed Bessemer was a German spy. Remember, this is 1918, and anti-German sentiment is at a fever pitch. She claimed the attacker was a dark, stocky man. The police, however, focused on Bessemer. They arrested him, charging him with the murder of his partner. But as he recovered, the charges were dropped. The evidence just wasn't there. And the city knew, deep down, this wasn't a domestic dispute. The axeman was back. The fear was palpable. New Orleans was a city on edge. Who was this phantom who entered homes at will, using his victims' own tools to slaughter them and then vanishing into the night? The press had a field day, dubbing the killer the Axeman. He was a boogeyman made real. Then on August 5th, the Axeman broke his pattern. He attacked Anna Schneider, a 20-year-old woman, not an Italian grocer. She was 8 months pregnant. Her father found her in a pool of blood, her face horribly gashed. Miraculously, both she and her baby survived. When she awoke, she could remember nothing. The attack was identical, a chiseled door panel, a weapon from the house, but the motive was gone. If it wasn't just Italians, then everyone was a potential victim. Panic turned to hysteria. People barricaded their doors. Men took shifts sitting awake, armed with shotguns guarding their families. The police were useless. They rounded up hundreds of suspects, but the Axeman remained a ghost. The final attack of 1918 was perhaps the most brutal yet, and it brought the terror to the affluent Uptown district. On August 10th, just 5 days after Anna Schneider, a young girl ran screaming from her home. Her uncle, Joseph Romano, was being attacked. When police arrived, they found Romano in the dining room, his head split open with an axe. He died 2 days later. The attacker had once again chiseled his way through a back door. The city was now completely in the grip of terror. The Axeman was not just a myth. He was a brutally efficient killer who could strike anywhere, anytime. Winter came and the city breathed a collective, uneasy sigh of relief. The attack stopped. Months went by. Perhaps the killer had moved on. Perhaps he had been arrested for another crime or even died. The war ended in November, and by the spring of 1919, New Orleans was looking forward, trying to forget the bloody summer of the Axeman. They were wrong. On March 10, 1919, the Axeman returned with a vengeance, and this time he committed his most heinous crime. He crossed the river again, back to Gretna. He broke into the home of another Italian grocer, Charles Cortimiglia. He attacked Charles and his wife, Rosie, with an axe. As they lay bleeding, Rosie's 2-year-old daughter, Mary, was sleeping in her crib. The Axeman picked up the child and brutally murdered her.
This was the act that broke the city. The murder of a child. It was a line that, once crossed, plunged New Orleans into a new level of darkness. Rosie and Charles miraculously survived. Rosie, in her grief and delirium, accused her neighbors, Il Orlando and Frank Giordano, of the crime. The police, desperate for a scapegoat, arrested them. Despite a total lack of evidence, the two men were convicted in one of the most shameful trials in the city's history. It was a clear miscarriage of justice, driven by a city's desperate need for an answer. It wouldn't be until Rosie recanted her story a year later that they were released. But in the days following the Cortimiglia tragedy, something else happened. Something that would elevate the Axeman from a mere serial killer to a legend of American folklore. The city's newspapers, including the Times-Picayune, received a letter. It was a taunting, arrogant, and utterly bizarre message, supposedly from the killer himself. It was postmarked, Hell. The letter began, Hell, March 13, 1919. Esteemed mortal, they have never caught me and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what you Orleans and your foolish police call the Axeman. The letter was pure theatrical evil. It mocked the police, calling them stupid. It claimed responsibility for the murders, stating that he would come and go as he pleases. The author claimed he was a close friend to the Angel of Death and that he would return to New Orleans to claim more victims. The prose was almost biblical in its arrogance. I am a demon from the hottest hell, it repeated. But it was the end of the letter that cemented the Axeman's legend. He made a proposal, a bizarre, terrifying, and very specific demand. He wrote, Now, to be exact, at 12:15, earthly time, on next Tuesday night, I am going to pass over New Orleans. In my infinite mercy, I am going to make a little proposition to you people. Here it is. I am very fond of jazz music, and I swear by all the devils in the nether regions that every person in whose home a jazz band is in full swing will be spared. Think about that. A city being held for ransom by music. He continued, if everyone has a jazz band playing, well then, so much the better for you people. One thing is certain, and that is that some of your people who do not jazz it on Tuesday night, if there be any, will get the axe. This was the ultimate act of psychological terror. The Axeman wasn't just a killer, he was a puppet master, and he was about to make the entire city dance. The night was set, Tuesday, March 19th, 1919. The city had a choice. Tower in fear or play. They played. That Tuesday night, New Orleans exploded in a cacophony of sound. It was, by all accounts, the loudest night in the city's history. This was the birthplace of jazz, and the city was going to use its own creation as a shield. Professional bands played marathon sets and packed dance halls. Amateur musicians, families who owned a piano, people who barely knew how to hold an instrument, all joined in. From the grand mansions of the Garden District to the humble shotgun houses of the Trem, every window was thrown open and the sound of jazz, ragtime, and blues spilled out into the humid night air. The Times-Picayune wrote that one could scarcely hear his own voice above the din. It was a party born of absolute mortal terror. People weren't just playing music, they were playing it loud, making sure the Axeman, wherever he was, could hear them, could mark their home as safe. Imagine the scene, a man, his wife, and his children gathered around a phonograph, playing the same jazz record over and over and over again, their eyes locked on the back door, listening for the sound of a chisel over the sound of the trumpet. And then midnight passed. 12:15 came and went. The music played on into the small hours of the morning until the sun began to rise. And the Axeman did not strike. Not a single attack was reported. The city had, it seemed, paid the demon his musical toll. The Axeman had kept his word. The city exhaled, but the story wasn't over. The letter, the night of jazz, it was the climax of the terror, but not the end. The Axeman would kill again. Through the summer and fall of 1919, he struck at least 3 more times. Steve Boca, another grocer, was attacked in his bed. He survived. Then, on October 27th, the Axeman claimed his final victim. He broke into the home of Mike Pepitone in Gretna. When his wife awoke, her husband was dead, his head smashed by an axe. The back door was chiseled. The scene was all too familiar. And then, nothing. Just as suddenly as he had arrived, the Axemen of New Orleans vanished. The killings stopped. The chiseled doors were no more. The phantom who had terrorized a city for 18 months, who had murdered at least 6 people and maimed 6 more, who claimed to be a demon and demanded music, was gone. He was never caught. His identity remains to this day one of America's greatest unsolved mysteries. So who was he? The theories are as wild as the case itself. The police at the time were convinced it was a mafia feud, pointing to the fact that most victims were Italian grocers. But this theory falls apart quickly. The mafia's black hand used bombs and shotguns, and their motive was always money and extortion. The Axeman's motive was butchery. He never stole a thing. Another theory points to Joseph Momfrey, a man who was shot and killed in Los Angeles in 2020 by the widow of Mike Pepitone, the Axeman's last victim. She claimed he was the killer. While intriguing, evidence suggests Momfrey was in prison during some of the Axeman's most brutal attacks. A more modern theory, proposed by historian Michael Newton, suggests the Axeman was a single disturbed individual, possibly a sexual sadist, who preyed on the vulnerable Italian-American community because he knew the police would be slow to protect them. The attacks, the chiseled doors, the use of the victim's own axe all point to a single, meticulous, and deeply disturbed individual. And what about the letter? Was it really from the killer? Or was it a twisted joke written by a local journalist or a prankster with a dark sense of humor who just happened to guess that the killer was a jazz fan? We will never know, but the effect was the same. It gave the killer a voice, a personality, and a legend. The Axeman of New Orleans remains a terrifying enigma. He was a product of his time, a shadow lurking in a city of music, a brutal counterpoint to the jazz age that was just beginning. He turned the city's greatest joy, its music, into a desperate plea for survival. He remains a ghost, a demon from the hottest hell who for one terrifying night made an entire city dance to his tune. What do you think? Who was the Axeman? Was he a supernatural demon as he claimed? A calculated mafia assassin? Or a lone bloodthirsty maniac? Let us know your theories down in the comments. Thank you for joining us on TSF History. If you found this story as chilling and fascinating as we did, please hit that like button to let us know. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss another deep dive into the past. We have so many more stories to tell. Until next time, stay curious and always check your back door.